That would be good. Let me know if it seems different. Hopefully I didn't steal somebody else's room, but if I did, they would have to fight me. I think I would win. So, I'm going to go ahead and talk about mental health, and we're going to talk about in Japan, in series, in a lot of other things here. So, I think part of this, I am drawn to tell you what I do and sort of what my credentials are, so I can give you a little perspective of where I'm coming from, and then we can kind of go on that journey together. So, my name is Will Nation. I am a counseling PhD student at Texas Women's in Denton. I do my research on isolation and social isolation, which I talk about in other stuff in other panels. I have a master's degree in counseling. I work as a therapist and as a college professor. So if you feel bored in this thing, I will not be offended, or because I am used to it. It's, college. But also I do other weird things. I do research. I run a group that uses Dungeons and Dragons to help people dealing with psychological issues. I also consult for esports occasionally. So I figure out helping college athletes that are esport athletes do their best as much as they can. Also, I've done a lot of other things. I used to be a drug counselor for drug addicted youth, which you haven't lived until you've met a 17-year-old ex-heroin addict. It's great. You kicked it at 17? That means you started when? But not for everybody. But I also got to give you my anime credentials. So some of you were in my earlier panel, so you know how terrible my anime taste is. But I am wildly obsessed with Evangelion, which if you haven't watched it yet, it's on Netflix, so you don't have any excuses anymore. I know it's a new dub, fight scene, it's fine. But also G Gundam, the greatest anime that's ever been created by humans. If you haven't seen it, there is a horse who pilots a horse Gundam. I'm not making that up, that's 100% true. It's amazing. Also, Hellsing, the original and ultimate. If you or someone who read Hellsing when it came out, it took 12 and a half years to get the last volume out, so you also know what suffering is. So, also, you can't judge me, it's my panel, I can say whatever I want about anime, and your taste can't be better than mine, because I'm the one talking. So, talk about why this is. So, the big one is I do panels on other things about my research and about talking about characters and using psychology in different ways. People would come up to me and say, like, hey, nobody talks about mental health in this, and in anime cons and in manga and all this. So that felt important to me. People were asking for it. So sorry if you're here, someone else asked for it, and you have to sit through it. Also, mental health awareness is a big deal, especially in the United States, especially recently. Whenever something bad happens, people are like, God, but mental health. And then no one does anything about it. So bringing that awareness felt important. Also, mental health in anime. There isn't a lot of it, but there's a lot of like really messed up people that are protagonists of anime. And like every anime protagonist, like their whole family's dead, because that's how you make a protagonist. Very confusing, and they're all 15 to 18. If you're over 18, you're ancient in anime, and you can't save the world anymore. No, it's tough. I'm like, I missed my window. Also, we're getting a lot of messages because Japanese media is different to American media. When you're watching American media, you know exactly what's being said to you because it's coming from where you live. But Japanese media is a little different. We'll talk about why that might be. Also, there's a lot of stigma around mental health in this country especially, but especially in Japan as well. And so we're talking a little bit about what those mean and what the differences might be. Also, real talk, I need to do something to keep presenting. If I did the same two things every time, people would get tired of it and be like, we saw that one last year. So, something new to do. So, to give you a real basic version of what's going to happen in here, there's a lot of examples of mental health either in or affecting our favorite series. So we'll go over sort of examples of both of those. And we're being told some things from Japanese culture that is maybe native to their culture, but we don't quite understand or get the same way they would. So if you're a Japanese person watching Japanese media, you would get something different out of it than you would being American or some other cultural or national group that would give you something different. And also, we've got to take a deeper look at this because it's there. The thing is, you can look not very hard and find this. And once you start thinking about it, it's going to be hard for you to unthink it, which, sorry in advance, I guess. But also, some of our favorite series are directly or indirectly impacted, whether they are about mental health or not. So that this could be, you have characters that suffer from mental health kind of concerns, or you have animators or creators or things like that. So we'll talk about sort of both of those directions. So mental health in Japan historically has not been a thing in that you don't talk about it. It's a thing of like, okay, if you are suffering, just don't tell anybody. don't mention it because that makes it real and then it's bad, right? And this is actually a cover of a book of mental health challenges facing contemporary Japanese society. You'll notice that there are the most stereotypical things you could find: a salaryman reading a book on a train, which is pretty standard, and a woman that just can't be drawn away from her book. I don't know. But I was doing some research on this, and there's this interesting Japanese idea for mental health. It's called the cherry blossom ideal. And the idea here is, if you don't know what cherry blossoms are, they bloom for a very short amount of time. There's one episode of every anime about it, and then they die, and then it's there's a festival, and that's the end. And the idea here is that mental health is well, your life is sort of like this cherry blossom, and you're only around a certain amount of time, and then you die. So don't be sad or whatever. Which you might recognize as supremely unhelpful to tell somebody who's having anxiety or depression. Well, you're gonna die, so it's cool. I wouldn't open with that if I were you. So that's a thing. Also, mental health is seen as uniquely difficult in Japanese culture. There's sort of this thing where it's seen as sort of a rejection of cultural norms. So say if you're isolated or if you're anxious and you have trouble with being in groups is a lot of your life being in Japanese society. They're very close-knit, very around people all the time kind of a society. And that is uniquely difficult. Whereas here, you can just be no, I don't want to go to that, and nobody's really going to be all that upset about it, right? There's also for a long time been an expectation to hide mental health concerns from people, and that could be family, that could be friends, but that could also be things like doctors, which the last thing you want to do is to go to your doctor and not tell them what's actually going on with you, yeah? Because then you're never going to actually get help, and that's a problem that's been in Japan for a long time. Also, and this is a weird one that I legitimately is true, I found it, you can be barred from public places if you are mentally ill in Japan. Which you might be well, that should be illegal, right? Because it is illegal in the United States. But in Japan, there are places like museums that have signs that are if you're this crazy, you can't be in the museum. Which is what? And also, how do you know that? How are you going to measure that? Do you have a card? Is there a psychopath kind of situation going on here? I don't know. But apparently you can be banned from public places for being mentally ill in Japan. That should be horrifying to you, if only because we all have something going on, and they're I'm sorry, you're too anxious today to come to the art museum. Come back next week. What? That shouldn't be a thing. So yeah, that's just cursory things that are available on the internet. You can find it. There's signs that say that, right? But also from research, from my point of view, from a psychological research perspective, cultural groups that are Asian American cultures, Japanese culture, typically seek mental health help. You look at every group across a continuum. Asian American groups are going to be typically the lowest, or one of the lower ones, in receiving mental health services. So they don't go and present themselves as wanting those services. Also, groups tend to present physical, not mental symptoms. So this is called somatic symptoms in psychology. The idea being that you are really depressed or sad, but you're oh, well, my back hurts, or my neck hurts, or my head hurts. This happens a lot. They'll go in and tell their doctor, well, my head hurts. And then you come back later and you do all the headache stuff. Well, your head hurts. You don't have a headache, so let's talk about mental health, right? And sometimes that is a way to get help, but it's sort of indirect, right? If you have to go to your doctor 6 times before you're actually going to get treated for what you need, that's going to take a long time, and it's not going to be a good experience. There's also in Asian cultures a stigma towards, quote, worse mental health concerns. So if you are schizophrenic, that's the worst one, is their argument. Well, if you have a little bit of anxiety, that's not good, but that's okay. But if you're schizophrenic, well, I don't even want to be around you, which it gets to be really hard because people that have more severe concerns might need more support, and if you're running it away from them, you're not going to get any help. Also, workers' comp rates for mental health in Japan rise every year. Every year that they've measured it, which means that it keeps going up a lot higher than you would really want it to be. Also, in Japan, they have twice the suicide rate of the United States. Twice. And they have 75% of the psychiatrists. So if you have twice the rate, you would want them to have potentially more psychiatrists, or percentage-wise, or per capita, right? No, they have 75% or less of the professionals that might be able to help them. And that's just psychiatrists. There's not necessarily research on other things, but point. So in a modern sense, we've talked about mental health, and this has sort of been historical, right? And the good part is that there has been sort of a change between recent past and like further past. So with the advent of the internet, with the advent of media, where like Western media is everywhere, Western culture is everywhere, there's been sort of public awareness of mental health. TV channels run documentaries and things, and they say, hey, talk to your doctor if this, right? Also Western influence, there's this great book called Crazy Like Us, and it's about how Western cultural ideals of mental health have spread to the rest of the world. But the idea basically is that the Western version of mental health is now out there. And the Western version is like, hey, if you're feeling bad, go take this pill, go talk to your doctor, right? Which has happened in Japan now, so it's a little bit more accepted than it used to be. Demographically, it's changing as well. The Japanese population is getting a lot older than it used to. So there's a lot of older people at the top, and the younger people are having different struggles. But young people also have different ideas and different cultural beliefs about things, which makes a big difference. There's also the internet. I don't know if you've heard of it. You can look stuff up on it. But if you're like, hey, I'm having blank, blank, blank symptoms, and you go to the internet's like, surprise, you're depressed. That gives you something to work with. You might go to a doctor and be like, well, the internet said I'm depressed. And also said I had cancer, if you go to WebMD, but like, so there. Also, interestingly, there have been, quote, marketable solutions to mental health. So for a long time, there was really no market for mental health stuff in Japan. Because like, if you go talk to the doctors, and the doctor's like, I can't get people to take this medication anyway, if you're the drug company, why do you care, right? You're not gonna make any money off the sick people, so who cares? I wish it wasn't that way, but it kind of is that way sometimes. But a Japanese drug company got this great idea, and literally it was one company doing one marketing campaign, and their marketing campaign was called The Cold of the Soul, which is like real existential in a way that's like, I don't know. But their pitch was, depression and sadness are like a cold, but it's like an internal kind of a cold. And you can take a drug and get better. And if you take medicine for a cold, why wouldn't you take it for this? And some of you I don't think are persuaded by this, but a lot of people in Japan were, because they're like, wait, it's just like a cold? Okay. And rates of antidepressant, this is for an antidepressant, rates of prescription went through the roof, because people were like, wait, it's okay? I can get medication for it? This is amazing. And then I'll look at doctors and they'll get prescriptions, right? So this has been a thing, like one advertising campaign completely blew this out of the water, which gives you a perspective of how little work you reasonably have to do to make a difference in this. Also, there's sort of a lessening of stigma. The more education you get out there, the more people talk about it, the less stigma there is. That's just a fact about pretty much anything. And this has happened in Japan as well. And I have Welcome to the NHK, which is one of my favorites, as part of it, right? There's anime, there's manga, there's mainstream media that covers these things. And if you cover it and you're seeing it more often, you're gonna feel like it's less abnormal, would be the argument. So with all that being said, let's talk about some uniquely Japanese things. I'm talking about manga and anime, which arguably are the reasons you're here, unless, I don't know, you have to be at the airport and just walk into the hotel the wrong way, I don't know. But there's some uniquely Japanese things in here. One of them is called karoshi, and it is working yourself to death. There's a word for it. There's a word for it because it happens a lot, if you know how words work. You make one up if you need one. It's called karoshi. It's a culture of overwork. So this is where you get like the salary man who like dies at his desk because he like worked all the way through and then had a stroke. This is a thing. It happens. The Japanese government measures it, which tells you how eerily scary this should be. And when we talk about specific things, there are mangaka who do over 100 hours of overtime in a month. I know, some eyes got big in this room, like, yeah, 100 plus hours of overtime. Yeah, they asked me to stay 1 hour past my shift and I get annoyed. 100 plus hours, that's brutal. Also, this is sort of seen as an okay, if not great thing. That there's an acceptable risk to this. And part of the reason is because of the way the manga industry works. I don't know how much everybody knows about this, so I'll give you a quick synopsis. If you are a mangaka, you are probably not going to be super successful starting out. You do a lot of things, you try to get published, you try to get serialized, which means you're being published regularly. And then maybe you get popular enough to be, Kishimoto or somebody who has done like, or Oda or whatever, who do like Naruto or One Piece or one of those things. Those people are the extreme outliers of mangaka, right? Most of them are just people toiling away, probably trying to publish. And if you get famous, if you get successful, you are very much incentivized to stay that way. to continue to produce, to make stuff until your arms fall off, because you might not work ever again. There are a lot of mangaka who had one really popular thing and never worked again. Now, granted, a lot of them nowadays like continue to go on and the big ones stay big, kind of a thing. But there are people that published one thing and that was it. And they're the price of success, right? To work that hard to keep that schedule, you might have to give up things. And that's an accepted thing in the manga industry and in anime as well. But yeah. Also, you probably don't know this, but deaths are shockingly common involving large productions. So the big one I always give is there's an animator on Naruto who died at his desk animating Naruto. Like, everybody in this room has watched at least one episode of Naruto, I'm quite sure, right? Something you have seen has had somebody affected by this, whether it's a friend or a family member or someone who on the team just, this is a big deal, it happens. Also, there's almost no work-life balance in the manga industry. Like, you have a home office and you work in that home office and like, hopefully your family says hi to you once in a while. And this manga, which if you can't read Japanese, I can't either, but this page here is by a mangaka, a famous mangaka. There was a report of a death, a karoshi death that happened in Japan, and it was big news because it was like a big company or something. And this mangaka makes this page, and the synopsis of this is the guy standing at the train station, and he's thinking like, if I jumped in front of that train, my work would be over and I wouldn't have to deal with it anymore. And he contemplates suicide very briefly standing on that train platform before he comes back and he realizes like, hey, I'm not going to do that and all that. But this is in response to seeing it in the media, like much less having someone you know go through it or, you know, having problems yourself. And that's one of the things because karoshi can be like death of natural causes being air quotes because like you're not supposed to die at that age, but it can be natural causes, it can be biological causes, it can also be suicide. So there are people that do commit suicide due to overwork. And so that's something we're going to talk about a little bit more. And I'm fully aware that this is depressing, so like, yeah. So I wish I was kidding about this, but this is a collectible vinyl figure of a chibi character who represents karoshi. His name is Karoshi-san. You can buy this on Amazon right now. Which, if you needed a thing of like, this is real and real uncomfortable, you can buy a collectible about it. I haven't bought one yet, but I'm gonna. Keep it in my office and just remind me to go home. Anyway, so that's that thing. But these are all reports from mangaka. So there are ones that seem obvious. So if you've ever seen anyone drawing manga or a manga about drawing manga, because there's a bunch of those recursive ones that are like super weird. But if you've ever seen it, you like hunch over like this, and you're like, hold on, let me do my art, right? There's lost eyesight. So they have mangaka who are like blind now because they've like squinted and like strained their eyes so much that their eyes don't work the way they used to. There's a famous mangaka who was blind in one eye because he lost eyesight in one of his eyes due to health, which when your job is leaning over tiny things of paper and drawing tiny pictures on them, that really impairs your ability to do your job. Also, the stance you need to like do that and draw, a lot of people have completely destroyed their spines and backs and joints and things. You get repetitive stress injuries from doing it over and over the way your body shouldn't be doing, right? There's a lot of them who like have very strange setups because they can't sit any other way comfortably because their joints don't work. Also, there are famous mangaka who have committed suicide, publicized or not. Also, general health damage. Like you go and they're just like, your health is not the way it should be for someone of your age, right? And there's also another common way you can die from overwork here is heart failure or stroke. So this can be you put too much strain, too much stress, and you just go and go and go until your body gives out. These are all things that have happened to mangaka. Maybe that you read, right? Because a lot of the ones you read, they're probably still alive, making the series. But people, their assistants, other famous people have gone through this, and it's a big deal. And yes, I know it's depressing, so here's a picture of a kitten. I know, it's cool. It's gonna get less sad from here, I promise. Please don't hate me. Here's a cute picture of a kitten. Okay, we're going on. So, let's talk about efforts. So, my friend here, I did not know this until I was talking about this, but my buddy Matt here was like, okay, well there's actually this anime, and it's on Crunchyroll, you can watch it. It's called Comical Psychosomatic Medicine. the pitch of this, they're like micro episodes, they're like 5 minutes long or something. And the pitch of it is they talk about mental health concerns and they explain it in a way that people can understand. And cause my thing this whole time, anyone knows Cells at Work, the anime, I was like, why is there not that for mental health? I imagine it would be less compelling, right? But if you meet like cute little anime girls in like cute hats or whatever about mental health, people would watch it, right? And I was like, well, why isn't there anime about mental health? And like, well, there is. So I go and watch it, and it's cute. It's on Crunchyroll, you can watch it. They're 5 minutes, it's not that much of an investment. And it's one of those examples of like something that's a good idea, but it's also like, oh, but, because I watch it as like a psychologist in training, and I'm like, oh, like the first episode's like, we're gonna talk about mental health, and like, it shouldn't be a stigma, and we're gonna openly talk about it. And they're like, and our first topic is erectile dysfunction. And you're like, you were so close. Like, they're like, yeah. And like, they try it. It's meant to be comedy, right? So it's supposed to be kind of funny. But, they get into it and they sort of talk about weird things, and you're like, oh man, that was so close. Like, if you get accurate information that's useful, that might be better, right? But it's an effort, and I like effort. So it also contains the cultural phenomenon Ladybeard. I don't know if anyone of you know who Ladybeard is. He is an Australian man who is a professional wrestler / pop idol. He wears Lolita clothes, has a giant beard and pigtails. It's excellent. He speaks like 17 different languages, and he's like a motivational speaker, and he's in a metal band. It's very confusing. But he's also features fairly prominently in this series occasionally. So if you see a weird, like, why is that man in a dress? It's him. So it's a cultural phenomenon. You can sponsor your own Patreon, weirdly enough. Also, there's some like weird bad stuff in here. So like in the episode about erectile dysfunction, actually maybe it's a different episode. They have an episode that is almost exclusively about waifus and being in love with waifus and your 2D wives, which is not what I would have chosen to talk about mental health in education. But they give some misleading information, or information that's kind of true but like needs context. They also talk about like weird stereotypical things, like I don't know if anyone's heard of grass-eating boys. The idea that there are young men who are atypical and wrong because they don't want to have actual human sex with actual human women, and they just want to like play great dating sims or whatever. Which, me too, I guess. But like, weird to bring it up. There's like a term for it, and they have an episode about it. And they're like, well, if someone you know like has a waifu, you should talk to them. And I'm like, is this really the choice that we should have made here? Okay, sure. Also, it has a lot of off-topic humor, so which is like obvious, right? It's a joke anime. So there's a lot of like, okay, you went from here to here, and like those two things aren't related, but I see the joke you were trying to make. And I bring up the question of like, why is explicitly this thing what exists? Why is this the one? And there's other ones, right, that have mental health. But why specifically is it absurdist humor that goes with mental health? And I think there are maybe some cultural reasons for that, but it's an interesting, like, you went and you said, let's make an anime about mental health, and the pitch was like, it'll be goofy. And there's maybe something to that, that tells us how they're looking at it, that might, like, why is there not a serious one? Why is there not a very, like, realistic one? And partly the reason would be like, hey, no one will watch it, right? But there's some questions there. So that's sort of what effort's been made. And we're going to talk about other series now that maybe are impacted. And some of these are going to be very obvious to you, and you have to sit through it. So Evangelion. Anyone? Yeah. So there are people that both love and hate Evangelion. It's the greatest series ever made. But the problem being that every character in Evangelion has a super apparent mental health problem. Every single one of them. Partially because they live in a post-apocalyptics where like alien god Jesus things blew up the earth, which is like, I get it, be sad about that, right? But all of them have very obvious mental health concerns. There are people that are traumatized, people that are depressed, anxious, and people that are all of those things at once. Shinji. So there's a lot of problems going on, which, duh, right? You see things like PTSD and attachment and psychosis, right? There's like a part where like Shinji has like a mental breakdown and like does some questionable things that I can't repeat in a family-friendly audience. But you know, you've seen it. There's a scene. It's not good. Also, mental health is a very purposeful part of the story. Because the thing that everybody dogs on the main character of Evangelion for is he just doesn't do his job of getting the robot and save the world, right? But he's also like 14 and he's like his dad hates him and he's like been traumatized and I think his mom's dead, kind of, but if you've seen the show, that's a joke that you get. So, yeah, and so there's a lot of like questionable things going on. And like, they're like, get in the robot and just fight giant monsters. You're like, this is hard. I'm 14, man. I got hormones and like weird stuff going on. So yeah, there's that. Also, if you've seen Evangelion, it takes a real sharp left turn, like halfway in. So like the first half, you're like, yeah, cool, there's giant robots and they like fight. It's great. And then like you get later and you're like, what? That sharp left turn is on purpose, right? It's tonal. It makes sense. That's part of it. Also, this is Hideaki Anno, who created Evangelion. This is an interesting one where it has a both in-universe and out-of-show explanation for why mental health is a big deal. So Hideaki Anno openly shares the influence of his own depression. He was horribly depressed when creating Evangelion. And that obviously showed in his work, right? He's a person who's having a real hard time, and he pours into his work, and it's there. And interestingly, if you watch him, if you see interviews of him, he says like very blunt things about mental health. Like he describes himself as a broken man who could do nothing. And then that seeps into the creation. That explains why some of the characters are a certain way, why the show looks a certain way, right? Also for Evangelion particularly, there's a blurry line between show and creator. Because Hideaki Anno, I don't know if you followed his career at all, but like his resume is like other stuff, Evangelion, 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 Evangelion. He made a Godzilla movie, and then he keeps making Evangelion, right? So for him, this is sort of his life in a weird way. And so there's a very blurry thing there. And a lot of him is in the show, and a lot of people will talk about it like, I don't like it because it's like sad. Like, well, yeah, the guy was sad when he was making it. What do you expect? Also, interestingly, Anno learned his diagnosis of depression while making the show. So he's like having a real struggle, and he finally goes to a doctor and talks to somebody. And in the middle of the creation of this great show is like, oh, I'm really horribly depressed. And so there's that piece. And positively, one of the good things about this is that he is very open about his struggles. Excuse me. So if you watch a thing with him, he will openly talk about like how hard it is to be in mental health treatment and like how hard it is to be in that field. And that's a big deal because Hideaki Anno is a big deal. Even if you don't like his series, he's well known. And if you're well-known people being like, yeah, sometimes I'm really sad and stuff and I can't go to work and I have a bad time, that goes a long way. Because if you don't have anyone talking about it, the message is you just don't talk about it, right? And so that's a big deal. Also, I don't know, this is a manga that's out there now. It's called My Lesbian Experience with Loneliness, which if that doesn't make you pick up the title cover, I don't know what will. But it's a comic, it's a manga about a young woman. It's autobiographical about like, 28 years old. The tagline is, I'm 28 years old, I have no confidence, no direction, and I've never had sex. That's the back cover, I swear. And like, but it's an autobiographical journey about like learning to connect to people and feel love and dealing with mental health concerns. So I kind of cheated here, it's autobiographical, so like, sorry, but not sorry. Also, it was an interesting way that this got published. It was an online only, kind of like One Punch Man, if anyone's familiar with that. One Punch Man was an online like web manga, basically, and then it got popular, then it got picked up and serialized and published. So this is the same thing. This was online and people like really connected to it. A publisher was like, wait a second, I can sell that, and then that's how it got there. And it's interesting too because it addresses things like the link between mental health and sexuality. So for the author, part of it is like, I have been horribly depressed and I have all these things, and like it's very hard for me to connect to people romantically, sexually, all of those things, which becomes a big deal. If you can't connect to people and you can't feel loved and you can't get the affection you want, that might impact your mental health in a significant way. Also, there's also personal reactions. This gives you a very contextualized version of like, I went and told my family, and my family was upset, kind of things. Like you can see a lot of Japanese things and how they do this. But also be aware that there are darker topics in here. Like there's a bit of a chapter where the author talks about non-suicidal self-injury, so like cutting or burning or things like that. And talks about suicide very openly, about like their struggles with it. Which again goes a long way here, because if no one talks about this, if it never appears in anything you read, what's the point, right? You're never going to hear about it. Another very obviously impacting one is Psychopaths. You knew this was coming if you sat in this panel. Like, so Psychopaths, I don't know if you've seen it, but if you don't, it's Gen Urobuchi, who is a crazy person, and all of his stuff is like real dark and like scary in a way. So very obviously in this series, the mentally ill are barred from society. If you are too crazy, they will explode you with a fancy sci-fi gun. Which you may recognize as what we should not be doing. The solution is not sci-fi guns that explode people, although that is kind of awesome, but don't murder people. but they actually kill the most mentally ill people in the show, like straight up. Now, of course, they're supposed to be, the problem is that they're criminals. The problem isn't that they're mentally ill. But like, is there that fine of a distinction? And like, we as a society in America, I don't know if you know this, but we kill mentally ill people all the time. It's not good. And Psychopaths is like very obviously like, well, that guy's too crazy to function, let's shoot him. And granted, like if you're not crazy enough to like just subdue you and like treat you, which is what you kind of should do, but like if you're too crazy, they just blow you up, it's cool. So, Psychopaths, right? It's also dangerous because this is a horrible stereotype that isn't true. So, the mentally ill are much more likely, demographically, to be the victim of a crime than to perpetuate a crime. That is scientific fact. You can look it up. But the thing is, Psychopaths gives you the message that mentally ill people are dangerous and they commit crimes. That's hard because if you are mentally ill and you need to go talk to somebody and the perception is that you're criminals, how many people are going to go talk to their doctor, right? How many people are going to go talk to a therapist or tell their family that they're feeling that way? Also, I don't have any data on this, but allegedly Urobuchi has something deeply wrong with him. A lot of people who watch his series are like, wow, that guy, like, what happened to him? Like, did he have a rough family life or what? But if you've ever seen his series, a lot of them have like some really like messed up things that happen in them, and you're like, well, something's wrong with that guy. I don't know what it is, but some. So there's maybe some impact there. I don't really have any data on that. He's sort of private in his own way, which makes sense. Now we get into the arguables. So there are some longer ones for this usually, but I'm gonna go with Full Metal. So Full Metal Alchemist, both versions of it, the anime, manga. Arguably, you could say that there's some stuff going on with this, right? Because the main character's parent dies twice in front of them, which I'm not talking about both their parents died, like one of them died twice, which is confusing and also traumatic. Also, both of the characters are, losing limbs and whole bodies and stuff. And like, that's probably traumatic, right? I have never lost a limb, but I would assume it's very concerning. And so there's that kind of piece of it too. And there's grief, and there's loss, and there's some horrible things that happen to these characters. And there are characters that committed atrocities as part of a military, and like for a war that was literally made up if you watch the whole series. So there are people dealing with the fallout of things that they've done, things that have been done to them. Those are all big deals in mental health, post-traumatic stress, right? And this is a confrontation of mental health and of life. There are people that are still struggling that have to get up and go to their day job and kill people with fire, but that's not the important part. Also, interestingly, a lot of the bad guys are like real crazy pants crazy. Like Kimball from Full Metal is like, I like the sound that people make when they explode. It's satisfying, and you're like, whoa, buddy, back right up with that. And like, got tattoos on his hands to do magic so you could kill people. Like, well-adjusted people don't do those things most of the time. And he's actually in prison, right? He gets let out of prison because the evil government's like, I need some people murdered, but like, I don't want to do that. Like, there's this real crazy guy that'll do it for you for fun. Then they let him out of prison, it's weird. Then he wears like an all-white suit and looks really satisfying, it's very strange. But yeah, right? And also, they get given power, right? Not for nothing, the government lets this guy out and they're like, well, go kill all these people, have fun. That's power, right? That's power given to you by a government. The government certifies you to be an alchemist so you can do whatever you want. Until they tell you you have to go kill all these people who don't quite look like you, and now we're having trouble, right? Yeah, so that's kind of a big deal. Also, not for nothing, the well-adjusted people in Fullmetal Alchemist die. Like, real horrible, like, there's this wonderful character who just loves his family so much. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to re-traumatize you. It was too soon, I know. Sorry. Not sorry, though, because I made my point, right? But like a lot of the really nice, like well-adjusted people either don't exist in this show or are quite dead by the end of it, right? And like the teachers and mentors, like, oh, I'm this nice person, except I don't have any of my internal organs anymore because, alchemy. What? No, stop, bad. Don't do that, right? So that's a problem, right? Don't even bring up the dog. Don't do that. Don't do that to all these people. It's too soon. Did I have this shirt? that has them doing the fusion dance. And I'm not a nice person, I'm just a person. But yeah. So with all this being said, we have a lot of different things here. So these are anime series that are either out or have been popular, that arguably have stuff going on with them as well. And I'm not super familiar with all of them, but like Watamote, if you've seen Watamote, or no matter how I look at it, it's your fault that I'm not popular, because manga. Character is like severely anxious the entire time, and like, I don't know how to exist as a normal human, and like social interactions are super weird, right? That's all anxiety. And like, if you haven't felt that way at some point, I would like whatever you have, because, yeah. But this is a big deal, right? Tokyo Ghoul is like, you literally turn into this crazy other thing and like have a problem. You have to commit violence on people to survive, right? Attack on Titan. Not for nothing that like, okay, you have to kill these giant representations of like human despair, and like everyone is like, watch their friends get eaten, and you know, everyone in the show dies except the 3 main characters. Because anime. Also, for lesser extent, you can say Yuri on Ice too. I haven't watched it, but there's a lot of like stuff out there about different series that have this in them. So to say that there's almost any series you could probably make this argument for, and you might be stretching a little bit, but there are examples, right? Another one I used to use was Naruto. Naruto's a big one. Like, everybody died in the Great Ninja War like 20 years ago, and then like, you know, all the main characters' parents are dead, or, you know, your whole family's dead because your brother murdered them all, you know, some really normal stuff. So those kind of things go in, right? And you can make those thematic arguments, but you can also make literal ones about like, a lot of people are having a lot of trauma in anime. You don't get to be a main character by like having a good personality and like being upbeat all the time. Sometimes bad things happen to you. So there's that. So let's talk about takeaways. So basically all this to say that Japanese depictions of mental health are very different from how we perceive mental health to be. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing. That's just something you have to be aware of. Because we're watching inherently, because you're here, I assume you have, watched or read something that is from Japan, right? And their cultural stuff isn't the same as ours, and so we don't necessarily have the same frame of reference for what they're talking about. So you might be told something or shown something without necessarily the same contextual awareness that somebody else from Japan would have. And that's not a bad thing, it just means that you have to understand where that's coming from. Because if you just accept it, that's when you get into some real problematic things of like, why am I being told that? Why did that come up? And this isn't always an intentional thing. We're constantly absorbing the messages around us. That's what happens in our culture. That's why our perception of things tendency is to be the same way as our dominant paradigm. And so just thinking about being more aware of that. And if you see something you don't understand, maybe look it up. Figure out why you don't understand it. And sometimes one of the reasons I love reading manga is because there's translator notes where like they'll explain to you why something is, which goes a long way, because you'll be like, what does that even mean? And they're like, there's a page of me explaining to you what this one panel of a manga is about, which those are my favorite ones to read. But you can have awareness, especially with the internet, especially with all these things. You can look it up. You can figure out what that's about, where it comes from. Also, mental health awareness and mental health generally is critical. And this can be to all angles of the things we like. It can be us who enjoy it, because there's some really messed up stuff out there. And like, if you're watching stuff and it makes you feel a certain way, maybe that's important, right? But this can also be the people who create our favorite things. You probably want them to keep creating the thing, right? You don't want them to like not be able to draw ever again and then never put out another chapter of your favorite thing, right? And so it behooves us to like want to care about them and make sure that they're okay. Also, you know, the people that work under them and with them, and changing a system that could be a different way. Because a lot of people, I don't know if you've had this experience, you watch something or read something that goes on hiatus for like 12 years because reasons. So like, be like Berserk or Hunter x Hunter or any of those kind of things. There are series that have been on hiatus for a really long time because of health or concerns. And most people I talk to at least, are okay with that. They're like, please, get healthy, don't die writing my series, right? But we can give that impression more firmly and say like, hey, we want you to be okay with this. We want a sustainable system where I don't care if the chapter is late, I just care if it, you know, is good and gets done and all that. It makes sense here to say that it gets better. You can intervene with mental health and it does get better, it does get easier. I know it's not comfortable to talk about and some of the stuff is real dark and like not fun, but it gets better, it gets easier. And the more you talk about it, the more you get out there and say what needs to be said, you're gonna make a difference. And just the Japanese timeline has showed us that like maybe 20 years ago, this would have been a completely different conversation. None of this data would have existed. None of the progress that had been made would be out there. That's a big deal. And whether that's getting people access to mental health care or training professionals or doing medication or whatever that is, if you put the effort and the resources into it, it gets better. And I know it doesn't always feel that way, and people struggle with it for sometimes lifelong. But in a short timeline, Japanese perceptions of mental health have changed. In a short timeline, American perceptions of mental health have changed. And we are a part of that conversation. If we're younger people or older people or whoever, if we're people going in and saying, like, you need to talk about this, you need to think about this, that content will exist for you. That's one of the truths of our system. Because this panel wouldn't exist if somebody hadn't come up and said to me, do mental health stuff, talk about it, right? If you request something to exist, it will exist eventually, because somebody's gonna make money on it. And I wish it wasn't that way, but like capitalism, right? But if you say, like, I want a manga or an anime that looks like this, or I want you to pay people more fairly, or whatever it is, eventually that conversation will get started and it might go somewhere. And don't underestimate the power you have in that conversation. So, with all that being said, here's some big takeaway kind of stuff here. So, what I want you to do from this, you don't have to do all of this, because like this is a lot, but things you can think about doing with this information. You can speak up, right? You are going to see something and be like, actually, sometimes anime and manga is really hard on the people who create it. It doesn't have to go any further than that, but it can, right? That's up to you on what you say. But also be critical of what you're receiving, because if you pay attention to what you're being told and how you read it, that might give you a different perspective on what you're seeing. And it might give you different ideas of what to do with it. And that's a big deal, because if you change how you view it and you change how you talk to people about it, it's going to change the whole experience. Also, raise awareness. So a lot of people don't know things like animators on Naruto died, right? I'm not saying you have to like open with that, right? You're like my favorite thing is Naruto, and you're like, oh, the one where all the guys died? Like, don't do that. But you can raise awareness about this, and you can ask for things to be included in, anime conventions or anime or series or coverage about things, right? And if there's anything we learned about the way things are going in our popular culture, like, things bleed off into things. And even though the anime community is somewhat weird sometimes because it's sort of isolated, some things that aren't. And if you talk about it and if you bring it to that, the community will be there for it, sort of. It just depends on how you do it and where you do it and all that. Also participate. So that's going to panels like this, right? Which, thank you, by the way, because you don't have to. But there are things like research, which I'm doing research. I'm doing my dissertation on isolation. So if you're interested in that kind of thing, I have business cards. You can take them, send me an email. I'll send it out to you. You're under no obligation to do anything. But there are opportunities for you to participate that you don't think are there. So I don't know if anyone has ever seen the International Anime Research Project. They're a research team that's in Commerce and some other places. But they have surveys online that you can do that are about you all, that are about us, right? And then they take that data and they publish it and say, people say anime nerds are like this, but we have the data that says they're like this. They also do panels sometimes, so if you ever see them around, they say hi. But there are opportunities out there for you to participate and do really interesting things with that. And not for nothing, a lot of them will go in and say, it turns out almost all the anime fans have jobs and friends and positive social relationships, and they're handsome and whatever, right? I don't know if they actually proved that scientifically, but there's a lot of things where you can go and combat misinformation just by you doing a survey that takes 10 or 15 minutes. And it's a survey, come on. You do it on BuzzFeed anyway, it's fine. Also, please help people that need it. And this is just a personal, if you know somebody that's struggling, please say something to them. Please do something. You don't have to do a lot, but if you're a person that's struggling and no one seems to notice, that doesn't feel good and it's not fun. And I get people that go to my office all the time that have been, I've been depressed for 5 years, I just didn't do anything about it. And all the evidence tells us that, hey, if you do this early, you catch it early, it gets better, it gets easier. The earlier you catch it, the better it is. So, say those kinds of things. And also give feedback, not necessarily directly to me about this, although that is always welcome, but give feedback. What do you want to see? If you get sent a survey by a convention or a streaming service or whatever it is, tell them what you want to see, tell them what you don't like. Because if you come in here and you're like, I wish you would have done this thing, I'll probably do it next time. I'll do it differently, right? So give feedback, because your voice matters. If you're the one to purchase these things, the same way if you went to something that was sketchy out here and you didn't like the way it was done, you would tell them, right? Do that, because they might not always listen to feedback, but like if enough people say something, something will get done, you know, or something will change where that thing won't exist anymore. You'll go find somebody else that does it better, right? So yeah, with all that being said, that's the end of my time. I've got time for questions if people have them. We've got like 5 minutes, but go ahead. This is my personal email here. You can always send me an email if you're interested in doing my survey for dissertation or just talking about stuff, or you need help with something that's going on, let me know. I've also got business cards in this thing up here, which they have my contact information, they have everything you might need to get a hold of me. I also do stuff on YouTube where I have these lectures and other panels, so if you can't make it to one of them, or if you want to show it to somebody or whatever, YouTube's right there for you. Yeah, other than that, I hope you have a good rest of your time. Thank you. Yeah, if anyone has questions or anything, let me know. We still got a few minutes while we're in here, but otherwise I'll just sit here and stare at you. Whatever you want to do. Doesn't make me uncomfortable. Yeah, go ahead.
Do you have any recommendations for parents like myself that don't want to be a party pooper but are concerned about some of the sadism in some of these shows? And again, I'm thinking about non-adults here, as adults, if you're into sadistic stuff.
Yeah, right, I can't stop you, right? Recommendations for what? Like series or ideas or?
How does one come across as not being anti-anime, but
oh yeah,
I'm having trouble finding the words. Not being anti-anime, but wanting to understand it's all fantasy and science fiction, right?
Yeah.
But there's still fantasy and science fiction that's healthier for young people and less healthy.
Yeah, and I think that's a good question. I think one of the things you can do is you can sort of approach a conversation with, like, kind of what you just said, of like, look, I'm not anti this thing you like, but I do have concerns about the thing you like. And I think that's an important conversation to have, especially with young people, about media that might be objectionable in some way. I'm not to say that it's bad, but to say, hey, I just want to make sure that we're clear of like, there's a lot of stuff in this, and like, this is fantasy, this is not a thing we do, right? But I think just that, you can open a conversation and just be open about it, and like, why do you like this? What is it about it? You know, explain it to me. And then share your concern of, my concern is that it has a lot of this in it, or it does this. And I think you might be surprised with the conversation you have there. Because if you let somebody tell you about the thing they like, you might, like, I know a lot of people that like really hyper messed up things and are like, I also don't endorse that, I don't like it, it's not good, but I like the series, right? So maybe you can share your concern that way and be open and transparent about, you know, this might be a thing that would be very concerning to me, that I just want you to know that, like, I'm concerned. Not judgmental, but.
That was kind of like this is my first con.
Well, welcome.
My kids are into anime, but I just feel like if I come and be a part of what my kids are into, I can learn from them. And so we're a blended family. So our daughter stays with her mom, but she talks about this anime, but I have a 20-year-old. So I'm thinking, I'm thinking what my 20-year-old is watching. I'm thinking my 14-year-old is watching.
Yeah.
But that was the case because it's a lot of different things. I
You're not wrong.
You know, it's a bit overwhelming. And so for me, that was just like, okay, well, why do you like this one then? I got one impression, and for her, she was watching something totally different than what he was watching, which was a good thing.
Yeah, sure.
But I didn't know. You know, I really didn't know. And so I was just like, okay, well, tell me what you're watching. Tell me what it's about. You know, and so the funny thing was the thing that she was watching, my 20-year-old was like, I've never heard of that. What is that? You know? But it was something that was more age appropriate for her. And like you said, I just asked her, like, well, what do you like about this? You know, why do you like this? And if I can say this in part, if my son's like 20, 24, they're older, but they still live in my house. So I need to know, you know, like you said, you just like the show, and it's just something you like, not something that you're into. If that makes any, you know, if that makes any sense.
Yeah,
you know, and so that's kind of how, like, you know, like I said, I don't know what's going on here. I'm just going to different panels just because, you know, I feel like if you want to keep that connection with your kids, you need to know what they're into, you know, even as
Sure.
they grow. And so that's kind of my thing. And so it's opened up conversation with, you know, with my kids. I'm like, okay, but teach me this again. What is this about? What is this? You know, what should I start with? You know, just trying to be a part. But I was like, because every time I walked in, it was something I'm like, you know, cartoons I know is Looney Tunes. You know, I'm old.
Yeah.
You know, that type of thing. But I mean, I just, like you said, I just asked her, you know, what is it you like about this and and the good things that she wasn't watching, other stuff that he was watching.
That's one of the good parts about anime is that it sort of self-sorts in its own way. Like most people of a certain age group that like a thing is because it's sort of for that age group, if that makes sense. So a lot of the like really adult stuff doesn't get widely circulated in groups that would be inappropriate for it. Like, we all know that one person who like watched something real messed up like way too early, but usually it sort of self-sorts that way, which I think is good. It also helps that a lot of anime and manga are made for like younger people, so even the really dark messed up stuff kind of doesn't exist in a way that like someone who's wildly inappropriate to find it will find it. But that is nice, like just be interested, because like as somebody who grew up before there were streaming services for it and before everything else, like you would talk to somebody about anime and be like, I like anime, and they're like, what, Chinese cartoons? And you're like, yeah. Like, so actually knowing and being interested goes a long way, I will say, as a parent. So keep doing that, because God love you for showing up to this thing. You used to have like a parent like drop you off at the convention, so yeah, round of applause. Yeah, that's my time. I have a panel tomorrow afternoon at 4. So talk about anime more if you're there. If not,